Welcome to Unapologetically Yours, a podcast where we go deep on everything from spirituality to relationships and connection to business and belief systems. Because in a world where we've been taught to play by the rules, it's time to live unapologetically. Welcome to the latest episode of the Unapologetically Yours podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Logan, and today we have a really, really special treat. We have Dr. Colleen Napleton joining us today. She is a mom, a psychologist, an entrepreneur, and a parenting expert, and she is here to drop her wisdom, and so happy to have you, Colleen.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, you have made such an impact in my life as a mom of 3 young kids, ages 4, 6, and 8, to be able to contact you and be like, what the hell? What does this mean? What is going on? Is like one of the greatest gifts. And I'm so grateful for you for that, because your knowledge of kids and how their brains function is off the charts. So how did you tell us a little bit about your story in terms of one, starting your own practice and knowing that you had this gift for the human psyche that you had to share with the world?
So I knew pretty young, actually. I knew in high school, or at least had the idea in high school, mostly because I thought high school therapists were not really good at their job and I thought I could do better. It's like, you think you know about adolescence? You don't know about adolescence. I know about adolescence.
I would have had such a heyday with you in high school if we had gone to the same school, because I know we would have probably like set up a practice of like, I bring the women, you do the services, and it would be just incredible.
Well, I loved listening to everybody. I mean, So then in college, I found out about the PsyD doctoral programs, and I thought this is exactly what I want to do. And so I went straight from undergrad into a doctoral program.
That's amazing. And that took 5 years.
Plus internship, plus postdoc. And I picked up a master's degree on the way. I didn't realize how long it was going to be. It was long, but obviously worth it.
And so from there, you went and started your own practice, Inner Life Psychological Services.
Yes. So, 12 or 13 years ago in Gold Coast, Chicago, I started Inner Life Psychological Services, and now we're a team of 10, and we provide individual therapy, play therapy, adult therapy, couples therapy, in-person therapy, online therapy, even psychological evaluation. So we're doing a little bit of everything, and we added life coaches as well. So it's really thriving and really a lot of fun.
That's incredible. And so on top of that, you also, a few years ago, launched another business, the Center for Balanced Parenthood.
Yeah, so that is like my love story.
I want to hear your love story.
So it started during COVID. I had a 4-year-old when the world shut down, and all of these moms of young children were at home, couldn't leave, couldn't take them to the park, couldn't do anything, and everyone was suffering. And I thought, who is taking care of the moms? Why isn't anyone taking care of the moms? The moms are taking care of everything. And in that, I decided to create a space where I could help take care of the moms. Like, I love being the mother of the mothers, right? That's the perfect role for me. And so I started this center that has mommy and me classes, that has parent coaching, that has anything that you need as a parent. I'm happy to help talk through, which is so rewarding for me and so helpful for all these families.
Well, it's been so helpful for me to be able to call you and ask you questions about what WTF is going on with this kid or that kid, or what should I do in this situation? Because your wisdom and knowledge of how the child's psyche works is unmatched. It's absolutely incredible, the way that you interpret their behavior and then translate that into ways that parents can make minor shifts to understand their kids even more. It's truly a gift.
Thank you.
So how did you know that you had a specific gift for working with children?
So I always did stuff with kids. Like, I was a babysitter. I would watch my 5 cousins, and like, that was easy for me, where now I'm like, how did I watch 5 kids? That's a lot of work. I was I was a volunteer at Children's Memorial Hospital for years in college. I just had a knack with kids sort of from the start. And then in my training, I went to this training program in Shaker Heights, Ohio for 2 years. And I learned everything there is to know about child development. And so now if you ask a question, I know like all these depth answers, right? All these steps deeper than other people would know. So like if you have a troubling behavior, someone would say, well, here's how you should stop it. And I'm like, is that the goal? Like, what if we understand why it's there in the first place? What if we address the need or the question or the worry that's causing it in the first place? That is what really helps, not just stopping the behavior.
Yeah. Well, and then you can also like work in flow with your kids instead of in the state of like opposition. And I feel like getting to know like the root cause of behavioral issues or other troubling behaviors or obstacles or even just developmental challenges that every parent faces,
right,
to have that new perspective and that new lens is really a powerful tool and such a gift that you provide. You are you're a kidtuitive, and I think that is the coolest thing about you is that it's one of the coolest.
It's pretty cool.
It's pretty fucking cool. Let's be honest. So your Kidtuition. And it's incredible.
Yeah.
So, okay, so here you are. You run 2 different businesses, and on top of that, you're a mom. And so you're not only an entrepreneur, but you also are part of your practice. So you offer your services. You're available to work with directly, and a mom. How is it balancing all of those things?
Well, it changes every year because I think particularly as a mom, the needs of my child change every year, and my capacity changes every year, and my need for balance changes every year. And so I try to be really respectful to myself now to make shifts that are best for me, because if I am drowning, how am I going to help other people? What am I really modeling if I'm not living it authentically myself, right? So when my son was a baby, I worked 3 really long days and I got home at 9 p.m. That would never work for me now. I would not want that. So that's not how I do it, right? So when my son started first grade, for example, I shifted my hours again so that most of them were while he's at school. So it's constantly thinking about what works best for my family, what changes do I need to make, and like, how do I balance this? I also have an incredible team, so I don't have to micromanage. I don't have to babysit people. Like, I have wonderful clinicians who know what to do, and I don't have to be their mommy. I just get to be their boss.
Isn't that a nice thing?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. So as you think about, all of the hats that you're wearing, and then what I love is that also directly translates to your knowledge and deep understanding of women today and the number of hats that they're wearing in their lives. Yep. So I'd love to talk a little bit about what your observations are about what it means to be a mom today.
Yeah, it's a lot. Maybe I would say too much, right?
Dare we say it? Dare we say? Yes.
Being a mom is like the ultimate balancing act. And people are wondering why they're not doing a great job, or they feel like they're not doing a great job. And it's like, there's too many things. So like sometimes we talk about all the things moms are juggling and like which one of those things are glass and which are plastic. And if you let some drop, that's okay, right? If you let more of those plastic ones drop, everything's going to be okay and you can keep going. So I think parenthood looks so different now, and a lot of it falls on mothers to do. And so sometimes part of what I say is questioning, like, do we have to be doing all this? Have you signed up for too much? Could you delegate more? Where could you use support? It is a huge role. It is a role of several people, and yet somehow one person is doing it, right? I feel like we could all use like an additional spouse at home to help.
We could all use a wife.
Yes.
So, but with all of that, so how do moms today, if you are like, yes, letting balls drop or plastic containers versus glass and all of that, what does it look like to try to get support? Some of the expectations for moms today is, I mean, starting at day one, starting when at pregnancy, to go above and beyond and be these incredible like super, I don't want to say like super present, but it's like the expectation for us to be like these super moms and wear all these hats and carry the load ourselves starts early.
Yeah, it's this like expectation of perfection. And I think part of it is just letting yourself know, like, those are not your expectations. Those are somebody else's expectations.
Yeah.
And I felt it too. Like, I was the like perfect pregnant person, right? Like, I did everything exactly as prescribed. And
No
I
lunch
would never,
meat?
no lunch meat. No. You know, when I had it on the way to the hospital, I had a Jimmy John's.
You know what I used to do? Because I was not a perfect pregnant person. I would order, there's like this sub shop in downtown Chicago called Bari. But like the kid's dad was a little bit more by the book. So I would go and order an Italian sub and a meatball sub, and I would eat the Italian on the way home and then eat the meatball later. So I was like, I don't subscribe to this, that lunch meat is.
But that was your flexibility, right?
Yeah.
And like, I had anxiety
totally
about
There's
it.
plenty of other things that I was like very dogmatic about, but
yeah. So like, my own pregnancy anxiety and postpartum anxiety is part of why I want to help people work through and talk about it so that they don't have to suffer in the way that other people do, right? So like, if I can allow you some flexibility or we can talk about facts and data, then sometimes that anxiety can lessen too.
yeah. So what are some of the ways that you help make moms' lives a little bit easier?
I think just bringing more reality to it, like especially in today's social media age, it's like, here's what other people are doing. And it's like, hold on. That is what other people are showing you they're doing. Are they really doing that way? Like, that's how they want to be perceived, but is that realistic? And is their way right for you and your family? Like, that's what people have to decide for themselves. Or so sometimes it's like blowing up perspective, right? And like, I try to be very authentic about my own experience so that people can see like what is true for some families versus others, right? And I make a lot of mistakes. I own my mistakes. There is no such thing as perfect parenting. So like, why are people pretending that that's what they're doing? Or why is that anyone's goal? Like, that sounds terrible.
It sounds terrible. It really does. So you work hands-on with not only moms, but with the kids directly. And so how do you see that like culture of perfectionism showing up in a destructive way for not only parents, but for the kids?
Yeah, so the person who gets it the most in a family is usually the oldest child, right? Because we are hyper-focused on them. We are zoned in. We're noticing everything. And this is, again, where our own anxiety gets in the way, right? So what do we do with the oldest? We stop them all the time. Don't do that. Don't touch that. Don't go there. Like, how are we teaching them to trust themselves if we tell them every instinct they have is wrong? And it's because we're new at this, right? We're learning. We're figuring it out. It does feel unsafe. You know, when you have bigger families, you see like the fourth and fifth kid is so flexible because that's fine. You know, they're not being stopped all the time. But what we're seeing with oldest kids, and this is, since the beginning of time, right? Like, there's a lot that happens with them. That in my family, we call them the practice kids. The three oldest were the practice kids. Because the parents are different versions of themselves later down the road. So each kid does have a very different set of parents, even if they're the same people throughout their whole life.
I think that's so true. Like, I think about when my daughter was born, like every single milestone, it was like she turned 6 months and I was like, solid food time. Like, that's it. It is time. Eat these sweet potatoes. Yeah. And, like we're not taught to trust our own instincts. We're taught to prioritize, like, okay, what are you putting on the baby registry? No. What are all the products that you can buy that will support you? But not necessarily taught to like trust ourselves as mothers,
which is like the number one thing.
It's the number one thing, to listen to our own instincts about things. And like the number of timeouts that my daughter got compared to my youngest, who has like never seen a timeout ever, and he's arguably the naughtiest. Now, I don't know if he's the naughtiest, but he's certainly the most precocious. And because it's different. You learn and you understand more about what matters and aren't necessarily counting those milestones
Well, and there's so
It's time
much
to walk.
history that comes into your parenting, right? So when you
Yes.
have your first child, you have some of your own thoughts, which are new because you don't have experience yet. And then you have your family's history coming through and your partner's family's history coming through. And you have, you know, parents or in-laws or brothers and sisters, whoever, giving you information that may or may not be true or may not work for you. And so you're taking in, oh, well, this person knows more. This person has more kids. This person has more experience. And until you get to the point where you're really trusting yourself to figure it out, you are going to make more mistakes because you're like, oh, they said this. They must be right. No, just because someone has more experience as a parent doesn't mean they know more than you about your own child.
Well, even more than that, like there's just so much stuff that we regurgitate without thinking about it.
Sure.
So we're just perpetuating things without stopping to examine, like, wait, is that actually true? And I think that so much of advice is that coming at that maybe is untested or just comes from a long line of just repeating old cycles.
Yeah, and some cycles aren't even bad. They just happen, right? Like we just do what we know. If you lived in a house for 18 years, there is so much in the repetition of that house that's going to come out when you're a parent. And maybe you haven't thought about it since you were 2 or 5 or 16. But now all of a sudden it's coming out of your mouth. And it doesn't have to be bad things, right? Like sometimes it's something like, listen here, Missy, you know, and you're like, where did that come from?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So so you're talking about how then as parents start to repeat the things, what we've been taught as kids. So yeah, that percentage of like what's innate in us. So maybe one part of this is just our own instinct. Then it's the outside world coming at us with information, and then it's our own experiences.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a lot. And so how do you for parents, how do you start the process of examining what is true and taking a closer look at like, wait, does this actually make sense for me and my family, and starting to trust your own instincts as a parent?
I think part of it is realizing there is not just like a set of rules that like good parents should follow, right? Every family is different. Every child is different. A lot of times the people that'll call me will be like, I did it this way with my first 2 kids. This is not working with this child. Like, I don't know what to do. And it's like, yeah, we have different person, different personality, different way of thinking about things, different birth order. Like there's a lot of change that needs to happen. So, you know, there's not a lot of awareness until there's a reason to be aware. So the way that people make changes is that they realize they don't like something. Like, oh, I feel guilty, or I feel icky, or I feel something because I don't like the way I did this or this happened. And then it becomes like, okay, now what? Like, I'm going to think about this. Why did I say or do this? Where does this come from? And I used to think way back when that like, oh, if you didn't like it, you just wouldn't do it. And it's so much more complicated than that.
Okay, tell me what you mean.
Much more. Like, for example, parents who were spanked as kids and are like, I would never do that to my child. You know, I'm going to do it differently. I'm certain. And then they find themselves in a situation where they've spanked their child and they have so much guilt and they feel terrible. And they thought, I didn't want to do this. I can't believe I did this. This is awful. And a lot of times they'll reach out to me at that point due to the guilt that they're feeling. And it's like, it makes perfect sense why you would have repeated this pattern even though you didn't like it. Like when your parents felt helpless or your parents tried to gain control, like this is what they did and this is what you learned and this is what you experienced. And the wish of not repeating it is not enough for a lot of things. You have to like, okay, what can I do instead differently next time? How could I have prevented this? You know, what kind of thing do I want to put into my default so that when this happens again, my default becomes this instead of that. But it's hard.
It's really hard. Repeating those old patterns, that's a big thing.
Yeah.
That's really hard.
It's a lot of effort.
It's a lot of effort. So let's talk about generational trauma and what you see.
There's a lot of it.
Tell me more. No, there is.
Yeah.
So how does that, in this culture of one, like perfectionism as in parenting, and us being, I think parents are tasked with really, really, really playing a much more active role in the kids' lives and their success, and through sports, through academics, through different societal pressures. But how do we take a pause and start to think about what traumas we may be passing down, or even just what patterns, what behaviors?
I think it depends what you're looking at. So one thing that happens is an awareness of your parents' own trauma, right? Like a lot of times people are angry with their parents, then they become parents, and either they develop empathy for how hard it is and how understanding that their parents did the best they could with what they had. And also people who are so angry, like, why didn't you get therapy? Why didn't you do it differently? Why did you pass your traumas on to us? And the reality is we live in a different world now. Like, okay, I go to therapy a lot. I always have. That is not the norm, right? And that was for sure not the norm with our parents. So they didn't have the openness to explore some of these things. They were taught, like, kids are resilient, don't worry about their traumas, and like, you know, push everything down and just move forward and you'll be fine. Not realizing that has such a significant impact. Like, pretending the feelings aren't there doesn't make the feelings go away. The feelings are still there, they just come out in different ways. So, you know, we have our own issues, we have our parents' issues, we have our parents' issues, and on and on and on. And it's like, here's the first generation really of a large percentage of people saying, I don't want this. I don't want this for myself. I'm not going to do this to them. But sometimes it happens, like, you know, I sort of think about like law school, where people have this terrible time in law school of the way that like professors treat you and put you on the spot. And like everyone has to go through this hard time because, you know, I had to do it, and you know, my teachers had to do it and their teachers had to do it.
My dues.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, but this isn't going to work for a large percent of people who would be great attorneys. So like, why don't we stop this? You know, why don't we make changes in things that are like not really working? Even like hazing, right? Of all kinds. Like, okay, yeah, you had to go through it, so you feel like this person has to go through it. But like, what if we just stopped doing that? What if we were just respectful to people? What if we didn't put people through a lot of bad stuff?
What are some generational behaviors that you're seeing people abandon in this age of parenting?
I think sort of like the mistreatment or maybe disrespect of young kids. Like, no one really thought of young children as having minds of their own. And I think now we're in a generation where people are like, holy cow, 2.5-year-olds know so much. I had no idea. This is so complicated. They're such complex thinkers. So instead of just disregarding them, I think that's the biggest change we're seeing. And it's starting so young, right? Like, people used to think you weren't really a person until you were like a second grader. And it's like, you're 8 then. Like, you've already lived a long time when you're 8. Like, you feel like you have a lot of life experience.
Right.
And the reality is, like, that happened long ago. Like, now when you think about mothers of babies, right, you're like, you're seeing their personalities come out. You're watching them grow. Like, you're invested in all these small things they're doing, especially with the first kid, right? You're like, oh, you can do this now. You can do this now. Like, your brain is amazing and learning. And I don't think people were really doing that.
Yeah, that's so true. I also feel like I like knew exactly who my kids were the second they came out. I was like, oh, I get you. Yeah, and it's funny, like, there's aspects of their personalities that I knew when they were 5 weeks old.
Yeah.
That are still strong. And they're
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
But that requires an attunement.
Right. And also, like, some level of, I don't know if it's validation, but if you're not taught that that is a possibility,
yeah,
then maybe you don't notice that.
Right. Like, I couldn't wait to find out who my child was going to be, as opposed to like, here's what you're going to like, here's who you're going to be, here's what you're going to do, you're going to study this. You know, people had their child's life laid out for them.
Yeah.
And it's like, why is that your choice?
Right.
And now people are like, oh, you might not be the same as me. You might have a different interest in me. Isn't that beautiful? As opposed to like, get in line and do as I say.
Yeah. So what would you say is, first of all, through the Center for Balanced Parenthood, people can come to you for things like classes and kindergarten readiness and other things. But tell me a little bit about your work with parents and children and why someone might come to you for support.
Yeah, I love the coaching stuff, and people will call about literally anything. It can be a behavior problem, like my kid got kicked out of dance class. It could be my child is being jealous and competitive with a cousin or a neighbor. It could be like there's a school refusal. It could be I am having a hard time with my in-laws, right? Sometimes people think parent coaching just means child development. It could be your role as a parent that you need help with, right? How do I ask my husband for this? How do I tell my mother-in-law that? And there's not always the opportunity to have these conversations with other people, or other people are too invested in the other people involved. And so they don't have a third party neutral view, and they don't have a degree in psychology that's helpful in understanding the behavior of the other adults involved too.
Right. Well, I mean, think about like that, all of the relationships that have to be supported to make a family feel successful and peaceful and all of that. And you, with your background, focus in child psychology, but then also general psychology and motherhood, allow you're uniquely equipped to support in all of those areas. And I love that.
Yeah.
And it's come in handy a time or two as I've navigated the road of life and relationships and all of those pieces. So what would you say is one of the biggest challenges of being a parent today?
Gosh, there are so many. Parenting is so hard. I think one of the biggest challenges is remembering that you matter in the decision making. This is particularly for moms, right? You matter. We went from like kids not being considered to kids being considered only sometimes at our own expense. Yeah. And so like, how do you really take a step back and think about the family as a whole, and you being an equal member of importance and part of that?
That resonates. It really does. Because I think that, again, like when it comes to those expectations of, okay, get your kids signed up for this, show up for this, do the work, do the thing, it can be really easy to lose sight of you as a person, you as a mother or a parent. So it applies to both, where what are you doing to bring you joy? What are you doing to fill your own cup? And how is your cup being full just as important as your kid attending gymnastics class 4 days a week?
And there's not a lot of good modeling on this, right? Like a lot of times women didn't put their own needs first. They were putting their husband or children in, traditional families. And so it was like this repetition of like, you don't matter. So kids grew up showing that like mom didn't have interest, mom didn't go out with friends, mom didn't do this. And so it was not modeled. And so now we have mothers that are saying, wait a minute, I'm doing all these things, but like none of it is for me. And it should never be that far off balance, right? Like, yeah, it's not all about you, but it should be about you. Some of it is about you. So like, what changes can be made? Is it spending time with your friends? Is it investing in yourself in a hobby, or, is it even just giving yourself time for therapy? Like, what is it for you that brings you joy? Even I like joke sometimes about like, what are you listening to in the car? Like, I just listen to Kids Bop sometimes, right? Because I'm like choosing what my child likes. But then what about my own wish for music? Like, we also want our child to know the world doesn't revolve around them.
Right.
So sometimes we have to find balance in these small ways, just like music.
What do you think is the risk of, well, first of all, this is why my kids know all the words to Doja Cat, even the bad ones. JK, but also not. So, because for me, I choose to just listen to, it was funny, like my Spotify top 10 list came out at the end of last year, and one of my girlfriends was like, clearly your kids don't have your Spotify yet. And then now my kids have my Spotify, and so it's changing what is listened to on repeat. But so what I'm curious about is with this, I think you're right. There's this expectation for moms and the keeping the pendulum at least at the middle level. What are some things that mothers can do to allow that pendulum to be more in the middle, where they are a consideration in their family dynamics and the choices that made, because it feels to me that moms are the ones who tend to make those sacrifices when it comes to carting kids around and carrying that mental load.
Yes, I think part of it is like addressing head on the guilt.
Yeah.
Because the guilt about taking time for yourself is what really gets in the way.
Where's that guilt come from?
I think it's mostly like societal expectations that then you take on in this unrealistic way. So it's like, you know, let's take working moms, for example, who feel guilty that anytime they're free, they're not with their children. And it's like, but who says the rule is every free moment you have to be with your child to be a good mother? Like, that doesn't exist anywhere. So how do we address the guilt? How do we say, if you work out because that makes you feel good, that is a benefit to your family, right? Working out is not a selfish thing that's taking time away from your kids. So addressing like, what do you like? What benefits you? What is okay to do? Whether you're home all day with your kids or working all day, you could still go out to dinner with your friends and that be the right choice for you and your family. That's not selfish. That's not a problem. That's not a bad behavior. Now, everything exists with balance. So yeah, if you're going out 5 or 6 nights a week, something might be off, or something, you might be avoiding something. Right?
Might be avoiding something.
There might be another problem that needs to be addressed there. But, you know, people are like, oh, I feel guilty if I go on this trip. I feel guilty if I go to the gym. I feel guilty if I try to get this promotion. And it's like, but where did it happen that like, if you do anything for you, that's bad? You're a whole person responsible for a lot of things. We should be thinking about you a lot. We should be considering you in all of the choices. Yeah. But there was not modeling on this. And social media doesn't help it. And then people are like, oh, you need self-care. Like, do a spa day. It's like, is that your self-care? Is there any lasting benefit of that?
Or you? Drinking wine.
Yeah. Like, okay, but now you feel terrible the next day. So like, Is that the benefit to you? So I think everyone trying to figure out what is self-care, and am I just listening to like what I saw on TikTok that tells me what is self-care? Are you benefiting from any of those suggestions? If the answer is no, we got to figure out what the other things are.
Yeah, I think it's so important that people take a second to examine what is important to them. What does fill your cup, whether that is connecting with nature, moving your body, taking a bath, journaling, spending time with friends, or maybe a combination of all of those things, and probably a combination of all of those things, and then putting that into practice in daily life.
And you'll feel less guilty if you practice it, if you do it. Like, a lot of times the guilt just prevents people from taking action. Like, if you feel guilty about working out, but then you start doing it and then you realize you feel so much better, or you have more energy for your kids, or you have all these things, then it's easier for you to take that hour for yourself 3 days a week or 5 days a week or whatever it is that you need to feel good. And then you're like, oh, I can see how this benefits me. I'm no longer going to feel guilty about this.
Right. It makes sense. And so one of the things that I think about is like advocating for that support to create that space within your partnership. Yep. So what are some things that people can do to like help advocate for themselves when it comes to getting that space and helping to co-create the space?
Yeah, I think it's figuring out what you want to try, telling your partner that that's what you want to try, figuring out, looking at both of your schedules and figuring out where it could fit in, right? Like, some things are not realistic. Like, the way your family operates does not allow for, a 5 a.m. workout or 5 p.m. workout, because that can't work. So you have to communicate and talk about, this is important to me. Let's figure out where we could fit this in and try it. And you obviously want your partner to want to be excited for you to do things for yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a shift, right? Maybe you haven't asked for anything before. So it's like starting that conversation, putting things into place, communicating, expressing your needs, not just about self-care, but about anything that's like a benefit to you.
Well, I mean, communication is the key in all facets of success in business and personal life. So I'd love to shift a little bit to talk about your Kidtuition.
Okay.
Yes, because it is your magic. And I would love for you to share some of your Kidtuitive wisdom, and maybe starting with some basic myths that you've been able to uncover over time about how kids' minds work.
Yeah, so I think there's just historical understanding of children that's inaccurate. And we believe it until we're given a reason not to, right? So historically, bad behavior is punished and people think that leads to change. I disagree. It's not that I think there's like no room for punishment, and like especially as kids get older, like and intentionally do things like that makes sense. But in the youngest years, the punishment doesn't make any sense. The behavior being corrected with like yelling or spanking or things that feel a little more hostile doesn't lead to any change that people want. So what is the behavior about? Like that's where I come in. I help you understand, why does this behavior exist in the first place? Because normally punishing the behavior doesn't change the behavior. Understanding the behavior and then helping with that worry or thought or whatever's going on, that's what changes the behavior. So let's take these like tantrum meltdowns, right, of every young child that's out there. So parents want to know, how do I stop my child from having this? And like, I send them to their room, it doesn't work. We yell at them, we put them in timeout, like it doesn't stop it. Like, yeah, I agree, it doesn't stop it. Usually when a kid is having a meltdown, it's a biological experience, right? It's their nervous system reacting. A lot of times it's because they can't verbally express what the upset is, so it comes out in their body. Punishing that does not stop it at all. A lot of times it just heightens the emotional response and makes it prolonged, which is worse for everybody. So when someone calmly sits with an upset kid tantruming, now they can feel that co-regulation and start to chill. And eventually they are learning from you, right? You're modeling, here's an upset and here's a calm response. And eventually they can take that on. And even with so a tantrum is different because it's less biological. So let's say a kid is so angry that you gave them the red cup when they wanted the blue cup, right? Everybody's been through that.
Yes.
And you try to reason with them.
Oh, wait.
It's
or
in
my
the
favorite,
dishwasher.
you hand a toddler a banana.
Yes.
It, like
you peeled it or you didn't peel it,
you did it wrong. Right. It was wrong. No matter how you did it, it's wrong.
You should have cut it. You shouldn't have cut it. I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah. So hell of it.
Everyone has been through this. And they try to bring reality in. Well, I already cut it, so we can't undo it. Well, that cup's in the dishwasher. Well, that is not helping them. That is an adult response to a problem. This is not an adult in the situation. So most of the time, those behaviors are about control. So someone calls me and they're like, this happens over and over again. I want to know what else is going on in the house because your child wants more control than what they have. And when I have the opportunity to explore this with parents, that's when we find out, oh, the nanny recently was fired. Oh, you just brought a new baby home. Oh, you moved. These things that were big events that a child didn't have control over, they start to try to gain control other places. Now all of a sudden they're having a fight about getting dressed. Now they won't leave the house. Now they won't wear those shoes. So the solution is not punishing the behavior. The solution is, how do we find other ways to give them that sense of control so that it doesn't have to be shown in all of these bad behaviors?
So how do you find this out? Like, what are some tricks that you have for investigating or communicating with your child in a way that uncovers the root cause of their behavior in that moment?
Well, so a lot of the times it's just for me to explore with the parents. Like, let's think together about what's been going on at home lately. And the great thing is, once parents have done this with me a couple of times, they're then able to do it on their own, right? Aha, here's a new bad behavior. What could be going on? Oh, you know what? Her teacher left and now school feels different. So now we're seeing control at home, right? But until we start doing this together, parents don't think, oh, I need to be the investigator here. I need to figure this out. They're just like, oh, I don't know. This kid's acting like a jerk. What's the problem? Stop being a jerk. When we explore it, when we figure it out, when we think about it, when we consider what might be happening from the child's perspective, that's when we can see great changes. And the compassion and empathy increase significantly when we figure that stuff out.
So what's another example of something that has really surprised you or an outcome that you've had from working directly with a parent child?
And so sometimes it's just like helping people bring this to awareness, right? So a very common one is a behavior, maybe 3 or 6 months after a new baby has come home. So people are sort of expecting it in those first days and weeks, like, oh, they're doing great, or, oh, like they're having a difficulty, but we're expecting it because we just brought the baby home. And then 3 or 4 months later, someone doesn't connect those anymore because the baby's been here for a while. So someone calls and we're talking about now you have a 4-month-old at home or a 6-month-old at home, and your 2.5, 3.5-year-old is having a hard time. They are still mad. Their life is still very changed, and they don't have reality. So sometimes it's that they have thought, oh, this baby's going to go back, or, oh, this baby's going to be different, or my mom will come back to how she was. And when the reality sits in that this is the new normal, there's a huge upset about this, right? And not for everybody, but for a lot. So then let's say the call is about hitting the baby. When I turn around, they bop them in the nose or they do this or that. Not uncommon.
Oh my God.
So they want to know, how do I stop them? You know, I tell them hands are not for hitting. It's not stopping it. Yeah, because they still have the mad feeling inside. So if they can't hit the baby, what do they do with that mad feeling? You got to give them another outlet. And you got to give them the chance to talk about the negative feeling. So that's sort of like a huge piece that I want everyone to understand. You cannot avoid negative feelings. We all have them every day, I would say, right? Like,
right.
Whether it's driving in the car, waiting for a train, whatever you do, like you probably feel mad every day.
Yeah.
They're not different.
Sure.
So the goal isn't like, hey, don't be mad anymore. The goal is, what do we do with the mad? How do we help you appropriately express mad feelings? I don't want you to hit. I don't want you to pinch. I don't want you to hurt people. I don't want you to be mean. But you are going to have mad feelings. So what do we do with them? And people are surprised that the most helpful thing is to talk about wishing the baby wasn't there. Because that's the wish for most of these kids. I wish you were available to me all the time still. I wish this baby wasn't here. I wish you didn't have to say no to me so much. Right? So how do we help kids say that in their age appropriate ways? Right? Like, you don't like that mom has to go up with the baby. You don't like that mom and dad have to split bedtime now instead of just mom. You miss when it was just the 3 of us. That is like the biggest one for oldest kids. You just ask, like, do you miss when it was just the 3 of us before the baby came? And the answer is usually yes. Right? Of course they do. Who wouldn't miss that?
Right.
That doesn't mean that, you know, they wish the baby was never born, but this is hard. If it's hard for the parents, imagine how hard it is for a little.
Yeah.
So giving them the words to express that, and then you see a decrease in those behaviors because now they're saying it.
Right.
I don't like this. I'm mad about this. I wish this. I wish this didn't happen. Now the behaviors improve.
I mean, just getting in the mind of a child and recognizing like that, I mean, even what you said earlier, that these kids at 2.5 are so intelligent. They have so much information. They have absorbed so much and they might not be able to articulate it, but it's there. And your methodology of giving a voice to kids, of giving them a pathway to express themselves and to forge that connection between parent and child is just so incredible.
Yeah, because what normally happens with like a controlling kid is the parents become more controlling and then everything gets worse.
Right.
So like when they call and we're able to talk this out, and that, because the most common thing parents say to me is like, oh, that makes so much sense. Right? Because it's like, it makes sense. And I'm giving you something that's like easily digestible. And you don't know it because you don't have 20 years experience of doing therapy and understanding the psyche of a toddler, right? Like maybe your toddler experience is in the last 1.5 years. You couldn't possibly know what I know.
Right.
You could be a preschool teacher for 25 years. You couldn't possibly know what I know because I've learned different things. And unless you've been taught this, which is like, I don't know, even like, 1% of therapists. If you haven't been taught it, you couldn't know it. So once I tell parents these things, now they know. And now they can use it over and over again. And now they can think about it with their next child, right? And so this is, to me, preventative mental health work. This is work that helps relationships between parent and child be better from the start. And like, that's a different trajectory. And I love that.
Well, what about parents who feel like they're doing a bad job or worried that
they're
doing
wrong.
a bad job?
I mean, think about how many bad moms you know.
Bad.
None?
Yeah.
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 I mean, when you think about, I mean, there might be people, oh, I would have done that differently. But how many bad moms do you know? The answer is probably 0.
Mm-hmm.
So I also say, if you're wondering if you're doing a good job, you're already in the top percentages of parenting, right? Like the parents who are wondering if they're doing a good job, the parents who are asking questions, the parents who want to know more, they are great parents. All parents make a lot of mistakes. Your job is not to avoid that. You can't avoid that. And making mistakes doesn't mean you're not a great parent. But that message gets all mixed up.
Right. Yeah. We're allowed to learn and grow together.
Yeah. And we're teaching our kids mistakes are okay and everybody makes them. So you have to follow that for yourself, right?
Sure.
Like you're going to get it wrong because you're a person. Like you're going to get it wrong and they're going to get it wrong. And that's okay because that's part of the human experience. Your job isn't to always get it right. Your job is just to try your best.
So am I going to fuck up my kids?
What do you mean by fuck up your kids?
Are they going to be talking about me with their therapist for a long, long, long time?
And no, but they're going to talk to their therapist about you because everyone's going to be in therapy hopefully in the future. And every parent is imperfect.
Right.
But that's how it's supposed to be. There is no way to avoid mistakes. There is no way to not disappoint your children. It's actually a disservice to try to not disappoint your children. How can your child function in the world if the world has revolved around them and no one has ever disappointed them?
Yeah.
People who expect to get what they want when they want it, not really the kind of kid you're trying to raise.
Or the employee you want to hire.
Correct.
All those things. It makes life a lot more difficult to manage.
Yeah, disappointment is part of the experience.
Yeah.
How do kids build frustration tolerance? By being frustrated.
Yeah.
If you avoid all frustration from their life because you're trying to be a perfect parent, you're going to be doing them a disservice. They have to function in the world. And the world is not the little world in your home. Right. They have to deal with teachers. They have to deal with peers. They have to deal with shopkeepers. They have to deal with everyone.
Right.
And the world is not going to revolve around them.
What are the ways that people can work with you, Colleen?
There are so many ways. So one of my favorite things is that I do these quick 15-minute calls. This is my favorite thing. In 15 minutes, we talk about like everything that is hard right now. And I give like very tangible advice on what to do. And this is fun for me because it's quick and easy. It's helpful. And then people check in every once in a while. Okay, this new thing came up. I just want to like check in really quick and ask you this. So I love that. I also do longer 45-minute calls. And a lot of times with those two, I really suggest that both parents be available for the call. A lot of times people have two different ways of thinking about things, and we want them to at least have the same information. They don't have to do it exactly the same, but if they have the same information from an expert versus just talking to each other, it makes more sense on why should we try it this way? Why should we implement a change? So the 45-minute calls, which I do in person and via Zoom, usually are with two parents, and we really kind of dive into things so that we can make greater change and have way more opportunity for understanding why a child is having a hard time.
That's great.
Yeah.
And you recently launched a new brand.
I did.
Tell us about it.
The Dr. Colleen Napleton brand.
Kidtuitive at your service.
Kidtuitive at your service. Yeah. So, you know, in thinking about how different I am than like, let's say a parent coach, right? Like anyone can call themselves a parent coach. I have all of this education, all of this experience. I am different, right? So like, what does that mean? My kidtuition is what makes the difference, right? I know what your kid is struggling with, even though they haven't said it. That is not something that typical helper could do. And so part of my goal is to help you grow your kidtuition, right? Are you using your kidtuition? I want you to ask yourself that when you're trying to understand, why is this happening? Why did they do this? Use your kidtuition to try to figure out what could be the reason behind this. Because when we focus on that instead of just the behavior, we have happier households.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about you is that you are helping moms and parents trust their own inner wisdom. And that so much of that has been with all of the stimulation we receive, all of the ads and all of the content about how to parent, it can really cloud the judgment of showing up in a way that feels right and feels best. And I love how you, with this new brand, are one, focusing on like the person who is the parent. And that person has their own experiences that they're bringing to the table. Yes. And then thinking about how to unpack maybe some of those things and leave behind certain elements and bring forward certain elements of that. And then also that one-on-one relationship with the child and the whole family ecosystem as a whole. So your experience in not only as a kidtuitive, but as a psychologist and someone who understands the human psyche and motherhood, you bring this all together in a way that is so beautiful and inspiring. And I'm so excited for you to just change so many lives with your information.
I love doing it too. Like, it's such a rewarding career, right? Like, when I help you understand your child better and you enjoy your child more and you get along better and there's less tension in your house, everybody does better. Like, your family is more likely to thrive when people feel understood.
I love that. Now, as we are coming up to the end, you have shared so much incredible information. I would like you to tell us what you are doing now to live unapologetically.
Oh, well, I'm pretty good at this. I have spent most of my life not following social norms. So, I do what's best for me. I do what's best for my family. I don't really get bothered by upsetting other people, which I think is really hard for women to do. I say no a lot. I need so much time to recharge. And I say no to things even I want to do because I know it's best for me to do that. I change my work schedule to figure out what's best for me. Even though there's a part of me that still says, oh, you should be able to be available for everyone, right? I have that wish, and I know that I can't do that for me. So, I love thinking about me and my little family and doing what's best. And just because everybody else is doing it does not mean I'm interested in doing it too.
I love that. You're an inspiration. Thank you so much for being here. We will share your website and social handles all in the show notes so that people can not only follow along, but also work with you. Yeah. Because like I said at the beginning, the number of times that you have helped me navigate this world of parenting, it's just been, you're an incredible resource, and I'm so grateful. So thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. And thank you for the kind words.
Until next time, we will see you later. Thank you so much for tuning in. Go out, make some mischief in the world. And until then, I'm Ashley, and I'm unapologetically yours.